Shalom, shalom. Welcome everybody to Clouds of Torah and the Exodus Project presents Jesus. I'm sorry, not Jesus, but Paul versus himself, Jesus, Peter, and James. And
Welcome to the New Testament Fight Club.
pretty much that's a good title. I like that title. Um, First I want to say, what's up, Steve?
What's going on, man? How's your evening going?
Everything is good. Glad to have you. For those who didn't catch part one, Steve was with us in part one, giving his commentary and some insights on some of these slides concerning how Paul does not agree with the Gospels or the disciples or even Jesus or himself.
I was about to say, or Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, or himself. So if you didn't, catch that, check out part one. Check out the Exodus Project, Steve's channel. He interviews people, they give testimony. He's got great content. He's got a lot of historical background information on a lot of stuff going on with the New Testament. He and I were both, former Christians. So, we was raised in that life and have I would say a decent understanding of, what the church teaches and how they,
Right.
Maneuver away
Paid
from the
minister.
topics and, how they omit and add to the Torah.
Yep.
So yeah, check that out. Subscribe. And
One exciting thing. First, I didn't know you were Native American. Maybe I did, but I didn't remember that you were Native American. So you're gonna like a show I have coming up. I'm gonna be interviewing a survivor of a Catholic internment school where
ooh,
Native Americans were treated less than appropriately. So everyone check that one
wow.
out. That one's gonna be deep. Yeah.
Wow. It's not on topic, but a lot of people, whether they call themselves African American or whatever, and some are, have African blood and are Native American as well, because a lot of Native Americans were registered as blacks.
Wow.
So just, on a different note, so there's a lot of people who have Native American blood that are called African American, and I'm sure, I would say I don't want to say use the term mutts, but we're mixed. We have
Mm-hmm.
so check that out, y'all. And of course, the whole concept of a lot of the Native Americans being the lost tribe. The Book of Mormon goes into a lot of that type of things. We don't subscribe to the Book of Mormon, of course, but at the same time, there's a lot of history with the natives and black people, if you want to call it. I really don't like
Right.
that term black because it doesn't really describe. There's no nation called black. There's no language called black. So anyway, we was dealing with Paul versus Jesus on one of the last slides because we read right here in Deuteronomy 10 and 18. It says, he administers justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves a stranger, giving him food and clothing. Now, Paul's whole deal is it's not the law, but just faith, right? It's not the works
Right.
that you do. It's just the faith. You just got to believe. And that's what justifies a person. But the Torah tells you to do things, to actually give people things. So you can believe in God all you want, but if you're not actually physically helping people, that person is still going to need food and clothing. And
Right.
even
Sure.
Jesus, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. You're good.
So even Jesus in Matthew 23 says, you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. And we've seen Micah saying, what does God require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God, which would be an act of faith because you're walking with God, which shows you believe in him. But being humble is something that you as a character trait that you have to work on, right? So again, we see the works coming into play.
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
we defined in the Greek the matters of the law, which is justice, which is judgment, decision making, giving sentence. So, if there's anything else you want to add to that, Steve?
I don't think so. Just to emphasize that the workings of a moral society, whether it be secular or in this case a Torah instituted society, needs laws, needs judgments, needs guidelines, needs boundaries. You know, we said it last time. I don't think there's any, red-blooded Christian out there who would agree that a lawless society is one good for living in, right? So I don't think we can apply that to the Torah when if the societal norms that are instituted, for example, like the U.S. Constitution, if that's something that we agree is, I mean, Americans, think about Americans. We look at the Constitution as, almost a holy document, right? It's like something we hold in high regard, right? How much more the Torah of God, right? The the Constitution, which is the Torah for the Jewish people. So that's just something I wish Christians would really try to wrap their heads around is, would you apply the same um, dismissiveness to the U.S. Constitution? I don't think so. So it's just something to think about.
Definitely. And a lot of people don't realize that the book of Deuteronomy is kind of the blueprint of how they set up the Constitution. It's not necessarily quoted verbatim, but they use it as a blueprint. So with that, let's jump into this. So Paul has a lot of problems with the Gospels, but then he tends to agree at times. So if you want to hit that.
Do this and you will live. It does not say believe this and live. Romans 2:13. For not the hearers of the law are just in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. Luke 10:25 and following. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? What is your reading of it? So he answered and said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered rightly. Do this and you will live.
Where's the faith? He could have really cleared up Paul's, stance, saying, you know what, if you believed in me, there's no blood, there's no lamb, there's no baptism. He said, what is written in the law or the Torah? What is your reading of it?
Yeah. And this is Luke's gospel again.
Oh.
I hate to keep beating that over the head, but this guy was supposed to be like a Paul fanboy, a companion of Paul during his evangelism, during his ministries. Like, I don't know about you, Davon, but if I was going to be traveling across a continent with someone, ministering day after day after day, like if you and I went on a traveling missions trip, if we had disagreed on our basic theology, I don't think that would work.
It doesn't work.
So,
I mean, if you notice, Paul had problems with people he traveled with.
Yeah.
He fell out with, what was it? Not Barnabas. Who did he fall out with? Started with a B, I thought. Barabbas. What was the guy's name?
No, he did travel with Barnabas.
But he fell out with somebody too. I want to say it was him.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we know Paul had a whole thing about if he wasn't the number one guy, it just wasn't going to work out. So we see, like you brought up, Luke chapter 1, verse 5 and 6 disagree with Paul's concept of, Jesus dying in vain, because it says, it actually agrees with the Torah. Luke chapter 1 says, they were blameless by walking in the Torah. And Paul says in Galatians 2:21, if you keep the Torah, then there was no need for Jesus. If you can be righteous by keeping Torah, there was no need for Jesus to die. He died in vain. And we see right here in Romans 2:13, that would confirm that. So Paul is not agreeing with himself.
Right.
And Definitely. Of course, he's not agreeing with Jesus. If Jesus says for eternal life, let alone just, being righteous, but for eternal life, the guy asked a very specific question. What should I do to inherit eternal life? And he said, what is written in the law? He could have said, well, you know what? I'm going to tell Paul in the future that you don't got to do none of this stuff. Just believe
Right.
and you're good. That's not what happened though.
Let grace be shown to the wicked, yet he will not learn righteousness. Romans 6:14. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under law, but under grace. Isaiah 26:9 and 10. With my soul I have desired you in the night. Yes, by my spirit within me I will seek you early. For when your judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. Let grace be shown to the wicked, yet he will not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness he will deal unjustly, and will not behold the majesty of the Lord.
Isaiah says a lot there, y'all. He says, for when your judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness, which means if somebody tells you you're not under the law, that means you're not going to keep these judgments and you're not going to learn righteousness.
Right.
Let grace be shown to the wicked, and he will not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness, he will deal unjustly. So the whole opposite happens concerning righteousness when you listen to Paul and claim you're under grace. I messed up.
Yeah, and to relay this in a modern layman's English to something again that I'm sure every Christian will agree with. If someone walks up to you and punches you in the face and he gets taken up on an assault charge, you're in court. The judge renders a judgment. He has to pay you some type of reparation or he goes to jail. That just evened the scales, right? Now there's some justice in the world, right? And he's not free to do it again. He should have learned his lesson. But if you go before that judge and he just stands there, you know, kind of like with a puppy dog face, and the judge says, okay, you know what? Just don't do it again. Everything's square. What motivation does he have to not walk right out the front door and punch you in the face again? That's really what Isaiah is getting at here, is that without the Torah, without justice and judgments, that's anarchy. And you need some type of deterrent to keep you from sinning, because equally as much as, you know, just as much as there are things we are commanded to do, there are things we are commanded not to do, right? So, you know, that's kind of a big takeaway here, people, is a moral society needs boundaries, needs guidelines, and to render them to grace where you can, you know, there was a heresy called the Nicolaitans. You ever hear of them?
Yeah, Revelation.
Yes. Well, here's the crazy part. The 7 deacons in Acts, right? The 7 Gentile deacons appointed by Paul that went to go sit counsel in Jerusalem. Like Stephen was one of them, Nicholas was one of them, and a couple others.
Mm-hmm.
So that means they were the top 7 Gentile Christians of the generation, right? They were like rendering, you know, judgments, right? They were the big shots of the Gentile Christians. Well, that Nicholas the deacon, those Nicolaitan heresy, that comes from him. And what their heresy is that they believe that since Jesus died, that it was just a blank check to sin. You could do whatever you want. It's all covered by the blood.
You're under grace. You're not under the law anymore.
Right. Where would he have gotten that from? If he's a Gentile deacon, clearly, and also he's from Antioch. Where was Paul's home base? So
Christians were first called Christians at Antioch.
So this man who is big time heresy, thinking that simply because Jesus has died, you're good to go. You can do whatever you want. Any kind of sin, blank check to it.
Interesting that Paul uses this language, for sin shall not have dominion over you. We see this in Genesis. God tells Cain, you should rule over sin. Sin creeps at the doors, desires for you, but you shall rule over it.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't tell him you're under grace. He said you should rule over it.
Right.
And we see Cain didn't listen and killed his brother.
Yeah.
You know, so and of course, you know, there was the laws of Noah,
Yeah.
laws of Adam, Enoch, Noah in that time. So, and we know there had to have been laws because it says Enoch walked with God. Well, how would he know what was, kosher if there was no rules? Like we said,
Right.
there's
Right.
always been rules, right?
How
Even
could
in
Noah's
science,
generation be wicked and judged if there wasn't a if
standard,
there
right?
wasn't a standard? Right.
Says Noah was righteous and walked with God. Well, what is it? How was he righteous, right? Even if you want to just get simple, we have the laws of physics. Well, who made those laws? Everybody knows that there's laws in physics and there had to be a lawgiver. So anyway,
Right. Exactly.
we see grace given to the wicked does not work for those who read it. Jeremiah or Isaiah 26:9-10.
If you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Galatians 5:18. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Romans 8:14. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. Luke 2:40. And the child grew and became strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Galatians 4:4. But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law. Psalm 19:7. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. 2 Peter 2:8. For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds.
So let's unpack a little bit of this. So in Galatians, Paul is saying, and feel free to jump in anytime, Steve. Galatians, Paul is saying, if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. Now, I could have swore Jesus was born under the Holy Spirit, right? So why was he born under the law? If you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law, right? And we see the child grew and became strong in spirit, even though he was supposedly born with it, right? The Holy Spirit is how
Right.
Mary conceived. So how did he get, the Spirit? And then, of course, he, lived with this Spirit from the time he was a baby. So if he was
But then
born
it
under
but
the
then it
law,
turned into a dove and descended upon him when he got
self,
baptized.
oh yeah, he did descend upon himself since he is the Holy Spirit too. So
In the shape of a bird.
right,
So
I
so
don't. Then he became a
God's not just a
lamb
man now, God's a bird now too. Like
and a lamb. So he became a bird and a lamb too.
yeah.
So so what I'm driving at here is Paul says if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. So that means in Romans 8:14, for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. So
Mm-hmm.
is he basically saying that they're not under the law because they're led by the Spirit, but Jesus, who is full of spirit and strong in spirit, he was born under the law. And what do Christians say? He kept the law perfectly.
Right.
Why would he keep something that he's not under?
Hmm.
Because of course you're going to say Jesus was led by the Spirit. Of course you're going to say Jesus is a son of God.
Yeah. I've had former messianics tell me straight out that when they were messianic Jews or whatever you want to call that, that they wouldn't even read Galatians because
They can't.
they can't. Yeah. Like they said they put it back up on the shelf and pray for understanding. Um when my friend told me that, I was like, wow, that kind of like hit me. Like if there's any messianics that watch this program, you can probably relate. Like Galatians is literally the treatise against the Torah. He calls it a ministry of death carved upon stone. He says, how much more glory shall the spiritual new covenant have? If even the old covenant, which is dying, fading away, had enough glory to make Moses's face shine, something to that effect, you know, a new and better covenant. This, like, honestly, no messianic knows what to do with Galatians. It's like it's like incriminating. Galatians incriminates Paul.
It does. It doesn't work for the gospels. It doesn't work for anybody Torah observant. Because again, back to Peter. Second Peter 2:8. For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul. Why was he tormented? Because he heard of their lawless, he saw and heard their lawless deeds, which means he kept the law, is why he was called righteous. And they were lawless, meaning they were not under the law or not keeping the law. So for Paul to say, if you're led by the Spirit, you are not under the law.
Mm-hmm.
Well, doesn't Proverbs say, he who does not hear the law, even his prayer is an abomination?
Right.
Proverbs 28. So you can't even pray if you're not under the law, whether you're under the laws of Noah or the laws of the 613 laws of Mount Sinai. So, and if the law is perfect, converting the soul, the testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. If the law makes one perfect and converts the soul, why wouldn't you be under the law? Why would you avoid that? Something that's going to convert your soul and make you wise. How does that work? Because if you are truly a follower of Jesus, and the Christians claim he was sinless because he kept the law perfectly, he had to be under the law to do that. Because if not, he couldn't have kept the law perfectly. He would have been breaking it. So
Right.
I
And
hope this is
even
computing.
the language is so cryptic, you know, under the law. Under the law. Like when I pull up to a stop sign, do I feel like I'm under the law? Or am I simply just obeying the law? Like,
Right.
you know what
Right.
I mean? Like his language, you need 15 PhDs to even understand like what he's talking about.
Well, this is why Peter, and of course the scholars say they don't even think Peter wrote this, but Peter says that Paul's letters are hard to understand, and they're not really hard to understand if you know what the point he's trying to make. Paul does not like the law, and he's a hypocrite because he should have told all this to James when James confronted him in front of everybody in Acts 21.
Yep.
He didn't say none of this.
Right. Instead agreeing with James saying, okay, yeah, I'll go minister to the non-Jews and tell them they have to keep the Noah, there's like a variation of the Noahide laws there in Acts,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
He says, yeah,
Acts
that's fine.
15.
I'll do that. But then you see in Corinthians, he goes right back. He goes right back to that Platonic dualism of physical versus spiritual. That if you realize that the idol that they're sacrificing to is fake and has no power, you can eat whatever you want. Like,
Right.
so he is such a chameleon, and he's such like I would picture Paul as being a type of person that was always looking over his shoulder, right? I'm gonna write this to you as long as James ain't looking. You know what I mean? I feel like
Right.
his audience dictated what he said.
Completely.
So
Completely. Because when he was in Acts 28, when he got to Rome, he told the Jews in Acts 28:17, I have done nothing against our people or against our customs. But in Acts 26, he admits to killing people and put them in prison. So it's like, okay, when you're in Jerusalem, you're admitting to your crimes, but in Rome, you didn't do nothing, huh?
right.
Okay.
And then Acts
So,
says he's a student of Gamaliel. But Gamaliel, when asked about the Christians according to the New Testament, says, leave them go.
right. So
If
why are
it's of
you?
if it's of God, we can't stop it. And if it's not, it'll fizzle out on its own. So why is Paul going out and beating him up? You know?
And why is he getting authority from Sadducees to do it?
Yeah.
And according to John, it says they don't have authority to kill nobody. So where did Paul really get his authority to kill? Maybe because he was a Roman, but we already
Maybe.
did a video on that. So y'all go
Yeah.
check that out.
Yep.
So let's move on.
Whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Hebrews 7:18. For on the one hand, there is an annulling of the former commandment because of its weakness and unprofitableness. Matthew 5:17 and 19. Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, One jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. The writer of Hebrews will be great or least in the kingdom of heaven.
So when Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ, did Paul say to keep the commandments or that they are weak and unprofitable? They're annulled. Did Jesus say that in Matthew 5:17-19?
No, don't think so.
So Paul's really not an imitator of Jesus, as
No.
he claimed. Read it for yourself. Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ, but he's not imitating Jesus. Even if he didn't write Hebrews 7:18, we read earlier that he says you're not under the law. And we know in Galatians, he calls the law all types of things, right? He says the former things are as dung to me. He calls circumcision. He says those who circumcise themselves, he wished that they would just castrate themselves.
Yep.
Mutilate themselves, cut it off.
That's what he says.
He says. Look it up. So Paul's really not who he claims to be as far as a follower of Jesus, because he completely says the opposite.
Right.
You can't be an imitator of Jesus, who right here says, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so should be called least in the kingdom. Well, I'm sure a Christian is not going to say Jesus is least in the kingdom. The Messiah is definitely not going to be the least in the kingdom to a Christian.
Right.
He's God to a lot of these people, right?
Yeah.
You're telling me God is the least in the kingdom, but yet Paul is saying the opposite.
Right.
Because
I just want to cite one verse.
Go ahead.
You have Matthew 5:18 there. Not one jot or tittle shall by no means pass. Well, according to Paul in 2 Corinthians 3, I don't know if you have this incorporated in here coming up or not, but he says, who also hath made us ministers of a new testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life.
Letter killeth.
A ministry of death carved on tablets of stone.
Excuse me. Well, it's interesting that Paul makes it seem like if you keep the Torah and you break it, it's a curse, right? Well, what happens when you don't listen to Paul in Galatians chapter 1, verse 8? Let him be cursed.
Yep.
So you have the same scenario going on. The Torah says when you break the law, a curse will follow. Deuteronomy 28 all day. Paul says if you don't listen to his gospel, let you be cursed. So he's basically is replacement theology. He's saying don't listen to the Torah because it curses you, but if you don't listen to me, you're also going to get cursed. So what's going on there, right? And if you want to say, well, Paul didn't write Hebrews, well, guess what? In Ephesians, he says the same thing. He said the law was abolished.
I mean,
here it says it's annulled.
Fundamentalists believe he did. It's really pretty much everyone else who doesn't, you know. But regardless, it's called Deutero-Pauline. Like if he didn't write it, one of his fanboys did, you know. So
it follows all of his teachings. So even if he didn't write Hebrews 7:18, Ephesians says the law is abolished too. So here it says saying it's annulled. Ephesians says abolished. Regardless, it's the same doctrine that the Torah has been done away with, despite Jesus saying till heaven and earth pass.
Right.
Not one jot or tittle will by no means pass from the law.
Right.
And if you say, well, because it says till all is fulfilled. If all was fulfilled, Jesus should be back and we shouldn't even be talking about this.
Right.
So you can't.
I mean, every morning when y'all walk out to go to work, what are you walking on? Is that Earth? What's that big yellow thing up in the sky? At the sun in the heavens? I don't know, y'all. Sounds like it hasn't all been fulfilled yet.
Nope. Doesn't work.
When did heaven and earth pass? Luke 16:17. And it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one tittle of the law to fail. Man, there's that Gospel of Luke again, making Paul look like a dingus. Ephesians 2:15. If you need to censor that out, that's fine.
We good.
Ephesians 2:15, having abolished in his flesh the enmity that is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace.
So if you don't want to say Paul wrote Hebrews 7:18, he definitely wrote Ephesians, according to everybody that I know. And he
Mm-hmm.
says the same thing. The law of commandments contained in ordinances. So right here, Jesus says, till heaven and earth pass, nothing's going to fail. So when did that happen for him to write Ephesians? They're not on the same page. In Galatians 1:11 and 12, Paul says everything he taught came from Jesus. He didn't get it from no man. He didn't learn none of this from Gamaliel.
Right. Letter to the
So,
Thessalonians. If it's not a letter that I wrote to you or a tradition that I gave you orally, reject it.
go read it for yourself. No need to make up things.
The law is not made for a righteous person. 1 Timothy 1:9, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous person, but for the lawless and insubordinate, for the ungodly and for the sinners, for the unholy and profane, for the murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers. Deuteronomy 7:9, therefore know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. Galatians 4:4. Oh, by the way, I just did a little video today on generational curses. So I think I'll probably be dropping that tomorrow. Galatians 4:4. But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law. Genesis 26:5. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws.
So according to 1 Timothy 1:9, Jesus was ungodly. He was a sinner. He was insubordinate, unholy, profane, a murderer, and a manslayer because he was under that law that is only made for sinners.
Yeah.
Why would God?
Which makes it really strange why Paul felt the need to circumcise him. Didn't Paul say, if you think circumcision does anything, you may as well just cut it off? But then finds this little boy Timotheus with a Jewish mother and circumcises him because he's Jewish.
Yeah. And doesn't he say, if you get circumcised, if you keep one part of the law, you got to keep the whole thing?
Yeah. Does he also not say, if you get circumcised, Christ benefits you nothing?
Nothing. So why would God send Jesus to be under the law, keep the law perfectly according to Christianity, if it's for sinners? It's for the ungodly, the unholy, profane, murderers, manslayers.
Why did Jesus have a bris? You see that right in the Gospels.
Yes.
Why did Jesus have a bris?
We got a problem. And he's basically saying Abraham was unrighteous, a sinner, unholy, profane, a murderer, because he kept the Torah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right there. Read Genesis 26:5. Look up that word laws in Hebrew. Torah. It actually says the Torah, plural, my Torahs. Because it was oral.
Yep.
So we see right here, Paul is just all over the place and just stabbing himself with problems. He's not agreeing with Jesus. He's not agreeing with himself. He's, like you said, he's circumcising Timothy, making Timothy subject to the whole law, according to Paul. He says, if you get circumcised, you got to keep everything if you keep that. But if it's for sinners and stuff, is he calling Timothy a sinner and all this stuff? Unholy, profane? How come he didn't say this to James when James said, y'all got to go to the temple and get the sacrifice because these men have a vow? He should have been like, no, that's for sinners, right? It says in Acts 21 that these men and many Jews are zealous for the law.
Mm-hmm.
So by Paul's definition, all these people were sinners, unholy, profane, murderers, manslayers, right? Murderers of mothers, murderers of fathers. Like, that's pretty extreme. Just because I keep the Torah, that makes me all that?
Right.
Dang. This guy's an extremist over here.
If righteousness comes through the law, Galatians 2:21. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died in vain. Christ died for nothing. Philippians 3:6. Concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. Romans 10:5. For Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law. The man who does those things shall live by them. Deuteronomy 6:25. Then it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all these commandments before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us.
You want to go first?
Um yeah, I'll take a second on Galatians 2:21. And I'm going to cross-reference that with the bottom one there, Deuteronomy 6:25. So, then it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe the commandments. Pretty plain, right?
Yep.
So when Paul says, if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died in vain. So, like a video we just recently did, I agree. If righteousness comes through the law, Christ most certainly did die for nothing. And that's a pretty good deduction on my part and Paul's part. He's right. You can be righteous via the law. He's right. Christ did die for nothing. Even if we do concede, okay, a person could be a sacrifice. Like, okay, we already have the Torah. We don't need anything else. So he really just goes out of his way to make these very like off the wall comparisons, and then people, you got to read when you read in Acts that it says Paul was a Pharisee or a Pharisee of Pharisees, but then you read something like that, and in the age of technology, when you can look at a slide like we're looking at right now, how can you still be in the church? I mean, it's really that simple. Look at those two verses right next to each other. They're in the same book. Like, Davon and I didn't sneak it in your house and change your Bibles up, you know? So come on, people, like, just look at it. What came first? There is a judicial, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like a judicial um proceeding that what's already there is established. Like, it's the burden of the person with new evidence to present their case, right? Against what already exists. You get what I'm saying? Like, whatever's new has to present its case against what's already set in stone, right?
New Testament.
Yeah. Paul preaches a new covenant. So it's like the burden is now on him to present the evidence. Like, you're the one who has to show us the truth against what's already in place. And I'm sorry, Paul, but you didn't do it. Like, you told on yourself, buddy.
He told on himself in Galatians 2:21 and in Philippians, because who's Paul talking about, saying concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. Who is he talking about?
Tell him,
How
Dave.
did
Who's he talking
who
about?
is righteous in the law? Which how did he attain righteousness which is in the law and be blameless? If he tells you in other books, you can't do that. Without the blood of Christ, you have nothing coming to you, right? And then he says in Romans, for Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law. The man who does those things shall live by them. That's exactly what Jesus told that lawyer in Luke 10:25-28.
Mm-hmm.
Do this and you will live.
Uh-oh.
So how exactly is Paul telling you that if righteousness comes through the law, Jesus died in vain? If that's true, then he basically just told you the whole concept of Jesus dying for you is bogus
Yep.
out of his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
One of his mostly upheld doctrines is Galatians. Like Romans and Galatians are like the Constitution for Christians.
Definitely. Definitely.
So one of them is telling you to keep the righteousness which is of the law, right? It says, for Moses writes about this. If you do it, you should live by them. If he believed that, this is what he's preaching. Why would he say something that he doesn't believe? Did he not believe that there's righteousness which is of the law? Because he surely says it in Philippians 3 and 6 too. He says the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
He said he was blameless by keeping the righteousness which is in the law. He tells you Moses writes about this, so he's
Yeah, well,
backing it up.
that's the rub of it, buddy, is when he's talking about himself, he can do no wrong, right? Concerning zeal, he persecuted the church, but he was keeping the law. He was completely in his rights to do so.
Blameless. But you can't be blameless if you don't keep the law. He's keeping the law, he's blameless, but if you do try to keep the law, something's wrong with you. You have fallen from grace. Romans 10:5 confirms Deuteronomy. Righteousness is when you keep the law.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul is telling you in Galatians 2:21, Jesus truly died for nothing.
It's a hard fact, people. Keep the commandments. Luke 1:6. And they, Zechariah and Elizabeth, they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord, blameless. Matthew 19:17. So he said to them, why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments.
So I guess Zacharias and Elizabeth entered into life.
Guess so.
And again, we see keeping the commandments and blameless, just like Paul says in Philippians 3:6. So if those two verses in the New Testament are true, that makes Galatians 2:21 true, that Jesus died in vain because righteousness comes through the law.
Yep.
We see Philippians 3:6 confirms this. Romans 10:5 confirms this. Deuteronomy 6:25 confirms this. Luke 1 and 6 confirms this. Matthew 19:17 confirms this. Where can you go to avoid this? What are you going to do with that? What is your pastor going to do when you ask him about this? If he doesn't throw you out of the congregation, especially if you front on him in front of everybody, right? If you pull him to the side, it might go different. But if you stand up in the middle of his sermon and say, hey, I got a question.
Homeboy's going to stand there all red-faced with his high blood pressure and not know what to do.
That's going to be bad for you. And your family will, they're going to be a little upset too because you're all going to get
ostracized.
Oh, man, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, buddy.
But you're just simply reading verses like we're doing. We're not, we're giving our commentary on it, but we're reading the verses. Like, this is not like we're just on here talking. Mm-hmm. Look it up yourself. It's highlighted.
I made a point in the video I recorded today about Christians are reading, we all know this, Christians are reading their New Testament. And then they're going back and reading the Tanakh through that lens. Like they are reading the Tanakh through Paul's eyes. And that's why this stuff catches on. You know what I'm saying? Like, because they already have that Pauline worldview being beaten over their head by Pastor KJV only. When they go back and read the Tanakh, the worldview is already skewed, right? You're reading it through this Pauline lens. You're already defeated, you know? So if you're already going in, and that's why so many people just skip over Leviticus or Numbers, right? Because they have they have this mindset already from Paul. Well, you know, if this stuff does anything, then Christ died in vain, and Christ died for my sins, and he's my Messiah. So what do I have need for this for? Right. And that's the problem. Instead of starting at point A as a Jew would, right? Point A with Genesis, knowing the Torah, and then any other literature being weighed against that, they're really weighing Torah against their New Testament. They're weighing Torah against their Jesus, right? And they believe Paul was their, divine sent non-Jew instructor, so how could they go against him? And that's really where it's going, is you're reading the Torah or whatever, they probably only read Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy through this lens, this Gnostic Pauline lens, and you're sunk. You're sunk because you think it's simply just the old covenant and has nothing to do with you. It didn't work. And that's how you fall in the trap.
You have to read, you have to study, not just read, you have to study. You really do. I've been harping on this, for almost every video I bring this up just to drive home so many points from this encounter, if you will. Go ahead and go through that.
Okay, that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law. Acts 21:20 and following. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord. And they said to him, You see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. But they have been informed about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children nor to walk according to the customs. What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore, do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing, except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, so idolatry, eating meat offered to idolatry, that's key there, people, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. Then Paul took the men, and the next day, having been purified with them, entered the temple to announce the expiration of the days of purification, at which time an offering should be made for each one of them.
Go ahead, if you like.
Okay. So first of all, we can truly understand that the law was in full effect. Why? Because let me ask you a question. What vow did these men take?
Numbers chapter 6, the vow of the Nazarenes.
Yep. It's a Nazarite vow. Nazarene, not a Nazarene. The Nazarite vow. That's why they're having their hair chopped off. And you brought a sacrifice, a sin sacrifice, people. That's key.
After Jesus is dead.
That's key. After Jesus is dead. And why is it you bring this will probably ring home with some Christians too. Why is it you have to bring a sin sacrifice after you finish your Nazarite vow, Davon?
Well, you basically you took a vow to abstain from something that God has already given you permission to eat. So it's almost like, in a sense, and of course it's a deeper conversation, but it's almost like you're trying to be a little too holy and avoid things that God has already given you permission to do. So you kind of overstepping your boundaries a little bit, but the intention was a good intention because you're trying to like purify yourself and get real connected. So there's something there that's still not so kosher.
Right. Exactly. And in more dialed in, you couldn't partake in anything from a grape. So you couldn't drink wine. So anytime a Christian is saying, "Oh, I don't drink," you say, "Why?" Not like I'm a alcoholic, but it's just like, why? Like, what's your reasoning? Oh, well, the Bible says so. Okay, where? because when a Nazarite took a vow to abstain from the grape, he had to bring a sacrifice after his vow was over. So that's just something to think about, people. Jesus is gone, and they're bringing sin sacrifices. But we harped on this a couple times. Paul stood down to these people when James called him out and said, and I actually heard you talk about this on a video recently. I thought you did an amazing job on bringing the Noahide laws here. Things offered to idols, like we said earlier in this video. Paul blows this up in Corinthians, basically says, that physical versus spiritual dualism. If you know that they're just pieces of stone, you can eat whatever you want. But James, and he agreed right here, right? That a non-Jew, this is basically like a Jesus Noahide. Ain't that weird? Like, this is basically like a Jesus Noahide, right? You can't eat things offered to idols, aka you must abstain from idolatry, from blood, from things strangled. That means you can't eat the limb of a living animal because you run the chance of the thing still being alive. It could have just passed out, might still be alive. From sexual immorality, and clearly stealing and murder aren't on here because that kind of goes without saying, right? Yeah. And then Paul goes with the Nazarites to watch them get their hair cut off, and he pays for their sacrifices. So, like, it's crazy. Paul agreed that even non-Jews have to follow some type of Noahide law code. Paul agreed to it right here. That's part of the Torah, everyone. Paul agreed to it. I'm going to say that like 5 more times. Paul agreed to it. Stood down to James. But then when he starts writing to all the non-Jew churches, it's like everything that happened in this chapter went completely out the window.
Yep.
And that's why he has to keep saying. That's why he has to keep saying, I promise you I'm telling the truth. I promise you I'm not lying. So that's really all I have on this slide, but you see that confrontation. If this is legitimate, this was really just an offshoot of Judaism and the non-Jewish code, the Noahide code, and they just added in Jesus.
Pretty much. So what's interesting is we see James. I mean, there's a lot of I'm gonna start from the beginning. So basically, James is saying that myriads of Jews, this is a lot of people, right? So for Christianity to say Jesus was the suffering servant because he was rejected, right? Myriads of Jews believed. That's a lot. A myriad is a lot. So what numbers are we using to say he was rejected? So myriads believe, so they have faith, right? That's the Paul requirement. You got to have faith, but it says, and they are zealous for the law. Why are they zealous for something that's for sinners? Because we read earlier, the law was made for sinners.
Right.
Excuse me. And it sounds like they would be Torah observing Jews at this point, because Jesus says, don't go to the Gentiles. He only changes that at the end of Matthew. So, because it clearly, it doesn't say Christians. It says there how many myriads of Jews who have believed and are zealous for the law. Well, they was already probably Torah observant Jews anyway.
Right.
Then
and zealous, the connotation of zealous. I mean,
right. Zealous for the law.
Like, that means you're willing to fight for what you believe in.
Right. A zealot is somebody who's about that life, right?
Yeah.
So it says they have been informed about you. That means there's a rumor going around that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses. Now, the question is this: was Paul's letters already written? Is how this information is getting spread about? Or was he just talking about it and he wrote them after he was confronted by James? There's no way to really verify that, but we see as 2 scenarios. Either he wrote the letters, everybody got wind of it, James checks them in front of everybody, or he spoke about what he's going to write in these letters, James checks them, and he goes and writes the letters anyway. Either way.
And just starts dumping money into Jerusalem.
Right. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So clearly we know that he's teaching people to forsake Moses. He's telling people you're not under the law, saying that you ought not to circumcise their children or walk according to the customs. Because Paul says you got to keep the customs I gave you, the traditions I gave you.
Yep. Yep.
What then? The assembly must certainly meet. What's the assembly, Steve?
What's the assembly?
Yeah, what's the assembly?
Well, I'm sure that would be the council of elders, the deacons.
Right, right. So if that means this is in front of everybody, y'all,
Mm-hmm.
the assembly will meet and they will hear you have come. This is a big deal. James is saying this is a big deal that you're here. Everybody's going to know you're here. Therefore, do what we tell you, because we got to let everybody know this ain't going to be the story. The story is going to be that you do keep the law and you don't forsake Moses. You don't teach none of this nonsense.
Right.
We have 4 men who have taken the vow. Why are they still taking vows? Why are they still keeping the Torah if it's been done away with?
Right.
It doesn't say you have men with you. It says we have 4 men who have taken the vow. Take them and be purified with them. So that means you're going to join them and you're going to show everybody that the stuff that they saying is not true. And it says concerning everything that they were informed concerning you are nothing but that you yourself walk orderly and keep the law. To walk orderly, that sounds like when it says Enoch walked with God, Noah walked with God, right? When you walk with God, that means you observant of his Torah, you observant of his laws, statutes, commandments. You're in step with God. The halakha means the walk.
Yeah.
In Hebrew.
Yep. Lecha means to go. Yep.
Yeah. You see what I'm saying? So James is telling Paul, you're going to keep the halakha and everybody's going to see it. Then concerning the Gentiles,
I kind of read it as James being a little bit more like dictatorial, a little bit more smart. Like you're gonna straighten yourself out.
You're gonna get your act together. Like when I was little, you better get your act together. That was the terminology. You got to get your act together. So concerning the Gentiles who believe, so again, we see faith, right? Paul's all about faith. But James says, concerning those who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing. You know, they don't have to keep the laws of the Jews, specifically the 613, but we do have laws for them. But Paul says the law was made for sinners. So why would James offer laws to people? Because it's easy just calling them sinners. Right? And then, like you said, he's basically quoting the 7 laws of Noah. Well, some of the laws of Noah. He doesn't go into all 7, but he basically summarizes them in these verses.
Right, yeah. I mean, he omits the ones that are pretty clear, ones that shouldn't even cross your mind.
Stealing,
those are the ones he omits.
System. Right. Yeah. I mean, those are like not, you don't, needless to say, right? Paul took them in on the next day, having been purified with them. So my question is, how did he get purified with them if he's already purified by Jesus? How come he's saying, no, I don't need to be purified. Jesus already purified me. Entered the temple to announce the expiration of the days of purification, at which time an offering should be made for each one of them. What was this offering? Read Numbers chapter 6. Yes. Sin offerings.
Korban chatas. Look it up.
So also, we see in the book of Acts, chapter 24, it says years later, Paul came and gave offerings to his nation. Why is he still doing all these rituals if you're not under the law anymore? You're under grace. And that stuff is for sinners and murderers and the unholy, right? His whole spiel is kicked out the door.
Something very striking here. Whenever they talk about Jesus's death, what do they call it?
Call it a lot of things. They call it a sin sacrifice.
Sacrifice, right? Sacrifice. It's always a sacrifice. The sacrificial system didn't work.
Right.
Well, they got tricky here in Acts. What did they call the sin sacrifice there at the end of the verse?
An offering?
An offering, which is a better translation of it anyhow. So they know what they were doing, buddy. This is all Christological. Everything they did was with agenda. They
Yeah,
knew what they were
offering
doing.
is a little different in the minds of people. Um, and in Hebrew, the word really means to draw near, like
Yeah, come
to
close.
come close to God.
Hmm.
So even like you said, the terminology is you got, and this is why you have to study the languages. You got to read the Greek, you got to read the Hebrew, and dig. You got to study, y'all. Y'all got to dig into these texts. So um, I'm gonna move on from this, but y'all see that the first Jews were Torah observant. It was many of them that were zealous for the law. Paul gets checked in front of everybody, and he listens. Now, the argument will be, I'm a Jew to the Jew, I'm a Gentile to the Gentile, I'm a right. He's a man of many hats, right? He wears many hats. Some people will call it hypocrite, right? In gang terminology,
Yeah.
he's a buster. You can't be a Crip today and a Blood tomorrow,
Mhm.
right? Like it doesn't work like that. So,
Yeah.
but this was Paul's time to shine, because
Mhm.
in Acts he tells the story of Damascus like 2, 3 times, right? He shares that like it's nothing here, not a peep.
Right.
Jesus, nothing about Jesus appeared to me. Nothing about his letters, and none of that.
Right.
None of
And
that.
you see in Galatians, he he comes off as so boastful that he says that he knew a guy who went to the third heaven. He's like, the guy is me, but I'm gonna say it was someone else. Went to the third heaven and received everything from, the Almighty face to face. Where's that right here?
This was his time to tell James and everybody, you're beneath me. I'm the lead apostle now. If you don't listen to my gospel, then you will be cursed.
Yep.
Galatians 1, 8, and 9. But he don't do that here, y'all.
But
This was
instead,
his
he
time.
instead he covered the fees with his tail between his legs and went to the mikveh with a couple guys when they got their hair cut off and brought a sin sacrifice.
And guess what? Doesn't it also say later on in Acts that Paul took a vow?
Oh.
What was that vow?
Hmm.
And why was he waiting around to do Pentecost? Because it says, I will tarry in Jerusalem until Pentecost. Why are you so eager to keep these holidays if all that stuff is for sinners, man? Ain't that what
Right.
you said?
Right.
Come on.
I have done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers. Acts 26, 9 and 10 in the NKJV. Indeed, I myself thought I must do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. This I also did in Jerusalem, and many of the saints I shut up in prison, having received authority from the chief priests, and when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Nice guy. Acts 28, 17. And it came to pass after 3 days that Paul called the leaders of the Jews together. So when they had come together, he said to them, Men and brethren, though I have done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers, yet I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans.
We see a big problem here. He's saying, I have done nothing against our people or the custom of our fathers, but that's exactly what James accused him of. And he never said, I didn't say that stuff. I didn't do that. Right.
Wrong guy. Wrong guy.
But in Acts 26, he admits to it.
Yep.
I shut up in prison, having received authority from the chief priests. Who is the saints that he shut up in prison?
Hmm.
Is that his people? These weren't Romans, were they?
No.
In Jerusalem? Who is these saints he shut up? Oh, they had to be people who believed in Jesus, because that's who he was persecuting, right? Because he
Hmm.
clearly says, I thought to myself, I got to do stuff contrary to Jesus. So I took his saints, or the followers of Jesus, which were originally Torah observant Jews, put them in prison, authority from the chief priests, who said that they didn't have authority to kill nobody when they was talking to Pilate in John chapter 18, verse 30.
Right.
And they were put to death. I cast my vote. Who was Paul voting with to put people to death if The Jews didn't have authority to do this. Then he clearly says, I ain't did nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers. I'm not teaching against the Torah, but all your letters are.
Right.
How did James get wind of it if you didn't say none of that stuff? He's clearly lying because now he's in Rome. He's not in Jerusalem anymore.
Right.
He's in Rome with his own apartment and a guard.
And the freedom to preach uninhibited.
Clearly says it. Nobody's
Now,
restricting Paul from teaching in
if you're
Nero's
locked in,
house.
yeah, that's that is such a striking instance. If you're imprisoned, do they put you in prison to be able to do the thing you were imprisoned for without any resistance? Like, do y'all get what we're saying, people? Like, this man is supposedly imprisoned and put to death by Nero for being this mega evangelist Christian, but yet he says while he's there, oh yeah, I'm preaching uninhibited. So they locked you up so you can do the very thing they locked you up for. What?
Uninhibited. Come on,
What?
y'all. Let's read Acts chapter 28. It tells you he got his own apartment and he gives shout outs to those in Caesar's household. And when you look up who the Caesar was at the time who had Paul put to death, it's Nero.
Mm-hmm.
We did a video on it.
Yep. Like, isn't that crazy? It says he has a guard outside. Most people interpret that meaning like he's being guarded, like so no one can get to him. Like, you get what I mean? Like, so he can't leave. But if he's preaching uninhibited, what's that guard doing?
Allowing it to happen.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that
guys.
guard is there to not let people at him, not vice versa. You know, that's armed security. That ain't a prison guard, you know. Come on,
This is
y'all.
right. This is why I titled the video Paul versus himself and Jesus and James and Peter.
Mm-hmm.
He's completely, and here's the problem is Luke is throwing him under the bus. If Luke wrote Acts and it was supposed to be his buddy, and Luke wrote Luke, these are problems that Paul,
Yeah.
you know, if you toss him out the window, then you know that's a whole nother story. You know, but Luke said he's got the best gospel. He said he researched it all for Theophilus. And y'all go check out Steve's video on Theophilus.
Oh yeah,
I got a little bit on Theophilus too.
We go deep on Theophilus on that one.
Right. So, you know.
Also, check out I think people would really understand the worldview a little bit better. I think we should put together a playlist. Like my Gnostic Paul video, my Antioch Paul video, our Nero video, and maybe these. And that could really give a broad spectrum picture of what Paul's background was, what his worldview was, and how that affects his writings. I think that'd be a good playlist for people to put together. What do you think?
And Daniel warned us about Christianity.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, we can put something together for y'all. So yeah, do y'all see how Paul was just not consistent according to the text, right? You know, these are not our opinions. We see right here in the same book, he's got two different stories. In one, he's admitting to killing people and putting them in prison, and then 2 chapters later, he ain't did nothing. He ain't did nothing to nobody. I have done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers. Mm-hmm. Well, yes, you did, or you just lied in Acts 26.
Gamaliel taught Paul nothing about Christianity. Galatians 5:12. Then the offense of the cross has ceased. I could wish that those who trouble you would even cut themselves off. Footnotes, Galatians 5:12, mutilate themselves or castrate themselves. Galatians 5:11 and 12, New English Translation. Now, brothers and sisters, if I am still preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. I wish those agitators would go so far as to castrate themselves. Galatians 1:12, New English Translation. For I did not receive it or learn it from any human source. Instead, I received it by revelation of Jesus Christ.
So the first thing I want to say is we see whatever he wrote in Galatians, he didn't get from no human source because Gamaliel didn't teach him this, right?
Right?
He's admitting no human taught him these things. He's putting it on Jesus. So would Jesus say, mutilate yourself? Because he was circumcised. So was he mutilated?
And that brings us right back to why did he also circumcise Timothy? Like,
Was
did
it
he
to shut
actually
people up?
did he
Right.
actually cut Timothy's off? Like, come on, y'all.
Well, he wasn't married, so there's some speculation there. So whether
Yeah,
he
was that some
probably wanted
pederasty
Timothy to
going
be
on?
like him. It's that's speculation, but we do see that he doesn't like circumcision. To say something like that and to use the term to castrate yourself, this is a covenant that God made with Abraham. This is
Right?
an important thing. Why would you say to those people who preach that? This is the thing. I want to clear up something. In the book of Acts, we see an argument of in order to get salvation, the Jews were saying, let me clarify, the Christian Jews were saying they got to get circumcised, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere in the Torah does it say that circumcision has anything to do with salvation. So circumcision was a covenant given to Abraham and those in his household.
Right.
Excuse me. Nowhere does it say you are saved because you got circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I missed that verse. So why that is even an argument, I have no idea. But we clearly see James didn't say nothing about that. James says they don't got to worry about none of that. We just want them to keep these certain laws we read in Acts 15, right? No
Mm-hmm.
idols, no blood, stay away from strangled animals and sexual immorality. Not a word about circumcision. So who brought that up? The Christian Jews who were, wanted the Gentiles to be saved by getting a circumcision, which means they were still keeping the Torah. Because why would they be bringing up circumcision if they were trying to get away from the Torah? Because
Right.
it's one of the first covenants given to Abraham.
Right. Yep.
Genesis 17.
Yeah, that's
So
that's the covenant that set him and his descendants apart from the rest of the nations, right? So
exactly.
that's the sanctification.
So Paul is clearly telling you to go against the customs of your fathers, which he lies about in Acts
Right.
28, saying, I ain't do none of that. I ain't said nothing about our
Right.
customs.
Right. And
Come on,
if
man.
if he really knew what it was about, he probably would have been all about it. We'd talk about Paul being physical versus spiritual, dualistic. We understand, from anyone who teaches on circumcision, a good kosher source, that, you know, it's taking your most unruly member, right? And basically putting it above nature. That's why you do it on the eighth day. There is something very intrinsically spiritual about a bris. It transcends nature. So maybe if Paul actually knew some Torah, aside from the superficial junk that he proposed, he might have been all about it. You know?
There's some scientific stuff behind it too. So
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I read, no, I think I heard this in the lecture that the eighth day is the point to where a baby's vitamin K is at its highest, and vitamin K prevents you from bleeding out. It helps
Yep.
the blood to clot. So
Yep.
when you do a circumcision on the eighth day, it's very helpful to the baby on a scientific level. So, how did they know that? Of course, God gave the Torah, it makes perfect sense. So for him to be so anti-circumcision and making the claim that you should cut it off or mutilate yourself when it's a very specific covenant given to
Right.
Abraham
He
that
said, I will that you be like me. Maybe he had a botched one or something.
right. And it's weird because he says, if he imitates Jesus, Jesus had a circumcision.
Yeah.
So why would he have been against anybody that was given the circumcision?
Right.
Right. So now we're going to see why he didn't learn this from Gamaliel, as
Taught
Luke
according to
claims.
taught according to the strictness of our Father's law. Matthew 23, 1 through 3. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the experts in the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, pay attention to what they tell you and do it, but do not what they do, for they do not practice what they teach. Acts 23:8. For Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Acts 22:3. I am indeed a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictness of our father's law, and was zealous toward God as all you are today.
So according to Jesus, he said, listen to the scribes and the Pharisees. He don't say listen to Paul. So the argument is, well, Paul's a Pharisee, right?
Right. That's the whole
But
point in Acts 22. A little bit of street
right.
cred.
But we
Yeah.
got a problem. We see that Sadducees say that there's no resurrection, no angel, no spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. So why would Paul be going to the Sadducees who don't even have the same beliefs as him to persecute Christians?
Mm-hmm.
If he is indeed a student of Gamaliel, who is a Torah scholar and a Pharisee, and Gamaliel said, leave the Christians alone.
Right. Not
What
just a
made
Pharisee.
Paul
He was the
right?
Gadol Hador. He was the Nasi of the generation.
Yeah,
That's like, to toss that name around, that's not just any Pharisee. That's the Pharisee.
that's the
Grandson of
Pharisee.
Hillel. Grandson of
Right.
Hillel. Like, this dude's a big deal, you know?
And he claims that he didn't learn none of this from him. He says in Galatians, I was not taught by man. I was taught everything I'm telling you by Jesus. So the fact that he claims that he didn't learn of this from Gamaliel, why even make it a boasting point?
Right.
If you're taught according to the strictness of our father's law, does that matter if you're not teaching nobody Torah? You see what I'm saying? That's like saying, oh, I got a degree at Harvard as you burn it in front of everybody.
That's true. That's
You
true.
know what I'm saying?
Burning that $200,000 piece of paper.
Right, in front of everybody. So
Mhm.
whatever Gamaliel did teach you, you're not teaching it in the New Testament. You're teaching the opposite of it, and you're lying about it, as we just
Right.
showed. And
Right.
you're going to Sadducees to get permission to kill Christians that they don't even have, according to the book of John. This is just not working out for Paul. If you got anything else to add, we can deal with that, or I can move to the next slide.
Um, the only one thing I would add is just that he's admitting, born in Tarsus. Just 2 seconds of history on Tarsus. We're talking the center of Greek thought in Asia Minor. Had a university of Greek philosophy there. So I don't know about you, but to me that worldview doesn't sound very Jewish. When we
No.
understand his dad was a Roman, right? So I don't know, people. But he says our father's law. Our father's law. Didn't he get his Roman citizenship through his father?
I mean, unless he got it through his mom, but then he wouldn't be Jewish. You know what I
Uh-oh.
mean?
Uh-oh.
So, I mean, come on, y'all. Come on, right? Ezra says, we sent the women and the children away. So why would they send the children away if they were Jewish? Read Ezra chapter 10. So Deuteronomy chapter 7. But anyway, let's
A
deal with
teacher of the
Gamaliel.
law. A teacher of the law held in respect by all people. Acts 5:34 and following. NKJV. Then one in the council stood up, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law held in respect by all the people. And he commanded them to put the apostles outside for a little while. And he said to them, Men of Israel, take heed to yourselves what you intend to do regarding these men. For some time ago, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody. A number of men, about 400, joined him. He was slain, and all who obeyed him were scattered and came to nothing. After this man, Judas of Galilee rose up in the days of the census and drew away many people after him. He also perished, and all who obeyed him were dispersed. And now I say to you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this work is of men, it will come to nothing.
Well, we see Gamaliel's on the scene. Gamaliel says, leave the Christians alone, but he says something interesting in that we've seen this movie before.
Yeah.
Men
Messianism
of
wasn't.
Israel. Yeah. Men of Israel, take heed to yourself, right? For some time ago, Theudas rose up claiming to be somebody. He had 400 disciples. How many disciples have? Jesus had the 12 plus the 70, right? But this guy had 400. He was slain. All who obeyed him were scattered and came to nothing. How does the book of James start out? Greetings to the 12 tribes who were scattered, right? So we see the same situation going on. This was pre-Jesus. And the same thing happened to this Theudas. He was slain and all who obeyed him were scattered and came to nothing. After this man, Judas of Galilee, not Jesus of Galilee. Interestingly enough, you only know about Judas Iscariot, but there was a Judas of Galilee who also had a big following in the days of the census when Jesus was a baby and drew away many people after him. So when Jesus is telling people there's going to be many coming and saying, I am the Christ, this already happened. Jesus is already, he himself is doing what already happened. He's claiming to be a Christ after everybody else then already, well, not going to say everybody, but after people before him have already come and done this.
Right.
There's nothing new under the sun. Jesus is just another person claiming to be somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go a little further, just real quick, let me say this.
Before we move on, get this before I lose this. This is good. It says that the New Testament states that Paul's father, name not mentioned, was a Roman citizen. However, both his parents were Jewish, from the tribe of Benjamin. Paul was born in Tarsus. The family were Pharisees. Paul was educated by the great teacher Gamaliel. Okay, that's what the New Testament says, right? That Roman citizen, both parents Jewish. So I went ahead and searched, how could a Jew be a Roman citizen in the first century? Well, let's hear what Philo has to say. Philo says that the Jews of Rome were mostly slaves who had become Roman citizens after manumission. Manumission is the release from slavery.
Slaves. So, okay. So Paul comes from the descendants of slaves. And he comes
what ideology are you following if you're a slave in somebody's house?
Theirs.
Theirs.
Theirs. So let's take that into account. Let's say Paul does come from slaves and he was taught by Gamaliel. He still teaches you something that Gamaliel doesn't teach, and he still goes against Jesus's teachings. Right. So none of it even matters. Right. Because we've shown you from the beginning of these two videos, he goes against Jesus and the Torah. So he goes against Jesus and Gamaliel. Mm-hmm. Who he claims to be taught by. He claims to be taught by Gamaliel, and he claims Jesus taught him everything he knows, and he still goes against them. Yep. Like it says right here. It says, so in verse 37, Gamaliel says, leave the Christians alone. And what does Paul do? He goes to the Sadducees to attack the Christians. So he don't even listen to Gamaliel. Yep. Which is, then he basically makes Jesus, Gamaliel is basically saying Jesus is just another preacher, because these guys already did this. Because if you want to toss in the miracles, in Acts chapter, 9, Simon is out here doing miracles too, and everybody think he has the power of God. Right. So they've seen this movie before. Mm-hmm. So I brought this chapter up just to show Paul didn't even listen to Gamaliel. Right. He can boast all he wants, but he didn't listen to him. And back in the days, people, the way it's taught and brought down is people respected their rabbi. Mm-hmm. There's no respect here. You went to a whole nother sect of Judaism to get your permission to do what you did. Right. A heretical faction nonetheless. Right. Heretic completely. It says right here, Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, no angel or spirit. What even made them Jewish? Like, did they not read Isaiah about the resurrection? Like, I mean, no angels or spirit. There's angels throughout the whole Tanakh. There's angels in the New Testament. The one that went down to the pool. If you got to the pool first, you got your illness or your illness healed. No spirit?
Right.
What?
An angel's the one who told Mama Mary that you got to call him Jesus.
Right.
Like,
this is who Paul's going to get permission to kill, and they said that they don't have permission to kill because the chief priest. It says he got it from the chief priest. When you look up Acts 5:17, it says those chief priests were Sadducees.
Mm-hmm.
In Acts 5:17. Excuse me. So this is just not working out.
Who gave Paul authority to kill or teach against the gospel of Jesus? John 18:31, New King James Version. Then Pilate said to him, you take him and judge him according to your law. Therefore the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. Acts 5:17. Then the high priest rose up and all those who were with him, which is the sect of the Sadducees, and they were filled with indignation.
So who gave Paul authority to kill? Maybe the Romans.
Yeah, maybe his kinsman Herodian.
I mean, it's right there on the screen, y'all. They said they don't have authority to kill nobody, or they would have had him killed. They would have just took him and stoned him. End of story.
And further, where was he doing the killing at? When he says he goes to the high priest to get permission to kill, where was he heading to?
Wherever he was casting his vote, because he says, I cast my vote to get them to put them to death.
Yeah, but what about the Damascus Road? He got a charge from the Sadducees to go there too. That's not Judea. Yeah, that's not Judea. Authority. Damascus is the capital of Samaria. What authority would they have there?
Y'all see how this
the Samaritans had their own temple up on Mount Gerizim. They completely rejected Judaism. So what's Paul doing up there, guys?
So we see that Paul lied
a lot
to the Jews in, not a lot, but he completely lied to the Jews in Rome in Acts 28, saying, I ain't did nothing to nobody. But he went and got permission from these Sadducees to kill and to put people in prison, according to him. That's his story.
Right. Let him be accursed. Galatians 1:8-9. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let them be cursed. Romans 12:14. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. 2 Corinthians 12:16 in the Legacy Standard Bible. But be that as it may, I did not burden you myself. Nevertheless, crafty fellow that I am, I took you in by deceit.
So let him be cursed.
So
you got another gospel, we're gonna curse you, right? We're not playing that. He says if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel, let him be accursed. But in the book of Romans, do not curse. So how does that work? I don't know how that works. How do you not curse somebody when you're supposed to curse them?
The mind of Paul.
James says a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. I wonder who he's talking about.
David says, I hate the double-minded, but I love your law.
Right. So if Paul says, be that as it may, I did not burden you myself. Nevertheless, crafty fellow that I am, I took you in by deceit. I believe him.
Me too. One of the only times.
Galatians 2:21 and 2 Corinthians 12:16. I cannot argue with Paul. He lied and he said Jesus died in vain. Out of his mouth. Out of his mouth. So we see right here, if you got a different, Paul says, if you got a different gospel than him, let him be accursed. So that means Jesus is cursed, James is cursed, and Peter is cursed. And for that matter, Luke is cursed because Luke's gospel does not agree with Paul.
Right.
So Paul is basically saying, if you follow anybody but me, let you be cursed, but bless and do not curse. I'll let y'all chew on that.
That means every Christian ever is cursed because their Bible has all these books in it.
Right.
Which means
oh, that's this is what we got to deal with, y'all. And we were Christians too, so we feel the pain and we know the frustration. And,
tough, guys. It's tough.
But it's
hard
okay
to hear these type things for the first time. But yeah, just know, people, that there is a light at the end of that tunnel. Definitely.
Jeremiah clearly says we have inherited lies from our fathers. But
that we make for ourselves gods when we are not. There's only one, y'all.
There's only one. And the Gentiles technically had the Torah before the Jews. So, we've already had if you read Job chapter 5, it tells you from 17 to 27 how to get salvation. It tells you in Job 36 how to repent. It tells you in Job chapter 1, Job was rich, Job was blameless. How did he achieve these things if there was no regulations and no rules or standards? You will be all right. You're going to be all right. Just study, repent, open up your book, study, take notes. And when you read the New Testament, you know what to look for, and you see that it's a fight club.
Jesus versus Paul is bigger than you can imagine. That's a pretty. Oh. Oh, he just came out of. All right.
You go back there. You see that?
Yep.
Okay.
So Jesus versus Paul is bigger than you can imagine. That's a pretty incredible heading, y'all, because that's your Messiah. Like, that's who you, the Christian, believes is your Messiah at odds with Paul. So John 12:47, and if anyone hears my words and does not keep them, I do not judge him. For I do not come to judge the world, but to save the world. Galatians 1:8 and 9. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be cursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be cursed.
So if Jesus says, if you don't listen to me, I don't judge you. But Paul says, if you don't listen to me, you're cursed. And Paul also says, be like me as I imitate Jesus. It don't sound like it.
Doesn't sound like it at all.
It doesn't sound like it. That's two different gospels right there. On top of everything we've already showed you in part 1 and, this second video. So, there you have it. Check out the Exodus Project. Give us a like, subscribe to the videos. Check out, the rest of the videos on Clouds of Torah. I'm sure Steve got a lot of stuff coming down the pipe. And yeah,
the two of us have something big coming down the pipe with all this content coming out. So for anyone who doesn't know, Davon and I are working on a book. And with all this content coming out, that's just padding the stats. So sooner rather than later, we're going to be dropping something real big. So hope y'all are ready.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me on this adventure. Um,
the Pauline adventure. I,
hey man,
I feel
it's
like we've made multiple videos within the last couple months, and we talk about different topics, and like without fail, it always comes back to Paul.
Paul's a problem. I mean, Paul's a Paul's a problem in for Torah observant people and for Christians because you know Catholicism, even though they like Paul, they got their own dogmas and stuff. But Paul really
Right.
is the church, y'all. Like
Hmm.
Paul trumps Jesus. If you didn't know that, like I'm telling you right now, whatever you're going to show anybody about Torah and how Jesus was a Torah observant Jew and he was perfect because he kept the law, Paul's going to tear that down, say that,
Yep.
you can't be righteous by keeping the law. So Paul is saying not even Jesus was righteous for keeping the law. Think about
Right.
that, y'all. If Paul says nobody can be righteous by keeping the law, why do Christians swear that since Jesus was perfect at keeping the law, he was righteous? I
Right.
just want to answer to that.
None is righteous, no, not one. That's Paul. That's
So how
straight
did
from.
Jesus do it? If the Torah doesn't work, why did Jesus do it?
Yeah.
Why? Why would you spend your life doing something that don't work? He says in the book of, well, he didn't say, but whoever wrote Hebrews says the law made nothing perfect. So how can Jesus be perfect by keeping the law?
Hmm. Hmm.
I just I would like an answer. Well, there is no answer, but
Right.
Anyway, y'all, like I said, check out Steve, the Exodus Project. Oh, go look at some testimonials, people from all different backgrounds, different walks. I got a video on there myself. So yeah. Steve, thanks again, man. And we will do this again on something else.
Yes, sir. Sounds
All
good.
right, y'all. Shalom, and we will talk to you later.
See you guys.